the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, where we discuss all things crypto related. Your host, Kieran Ryan.
Is Bitcoin more than a speculative asset? Millions of people certainly think so. In his book Gold Wars, Ferdinand Lips points out that countries that adhered to the gold standard had stable currencies lasting hundreds of years. And it's not so long ago that currencies like the British pound and the US dollar were convertible into gold. When the First World War came around, the British government ditched the gold standard so that it could finance the war. Most of the world followed suit because deficit financing and credit issuance was needed for the military campaigns that followed. Lips makes the point that had Britain remained on the gold standard, the war would have lasted no more than a few months. Now, Bitcoin was conceived as not just a new form of money, but as an instrument of freedom. That's pretty clear from a reading of the Bitcoin white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto. It was designed as a form of sound digital money that cannot be devalued by central planners, and that, of course, limits the power of governments to behave recklessly, as in going to war. Well, someone who's given this a lot of thought is Farzam Ehsani, who's a friend of the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast. He's also the CEO and founder of crypto exchange Valor. Hi, Farzam. Welcome back to the podcast. It's good to talk to you again.
Thank you so much, Kieran. Always a pleasure to be with you.
All right, so we're going to get into a philosophical discussion today, and it's about money because money has a lot to do with the quality of freedom that we have. You recently interviewed Saifedean Ammous, who is the author of the Bitcoin Standard, and he has another book, a more recent one, out called The Fiat Standard. And you touched, and this is on your podcast, you touched on the subject of Bitcoin as an instrument of freedom. Explain some of your thoughts around this subject.
Yeah, it's a very broad subject, and it really touches upon the concept of money in society and what money has been in the past, what it is today, and what it will be in the future. And I think we are at a very peculiar state in our societal evolution and civilization, where there is a tremendous explosion of productivity and technology and a whole bunch of progress that we're seeing. But we're also seeing some tremendous difficulties in the monetary system. When I talk about a monetary system, I'm talking specifically about our, let's say, our traditional financial system with the US dollar as its reserve currency. And if you look back, till 2008, we've seen a real number of changes in our policy stances as a society. And one of the key things, if you look at people's language, is when we talk about moving into things like unconventional monetary policy, or quantitative easing, where it's not just a matter of moving interest rates up or down, but our central banks who have free rein into deciding and deliberating upon the amount of money in society. They really are the ones that are dictating kind of what happens and how they influence interest rates. So they've started to get into the market and start buying bonds and mortgage-backed securities, etc. So this isn't something that was done. It hasn't been done for a very long time. It's something in our very recent history. And the reason I bring that up is that when we talk about unconventional monetary policy, we've moved there from conventional monetary policy. So if conventional monetary policy was working, then we would not have moved to unconventional monetary policy. And so it really brings a lot of questions about the system that we're in. And to your question about freedom, many people are trapped in our current system, particularly with inflation that we've seen over the last few years, particularly with mandates of central banks across the world having an inflation rate, which is really a devaluation rate because their mandate is to devalue the currency a particular amount or a percentage every year. And I've thought a lot about this because it sounds very perverse and very strange to me. There's some economic theories that say, you need to devalue people's money so that they are incentivized to spend it before it loses money. And that's good for the economy because it moves money around the economy and there's a higher velocity of money, what they call a velocity of money. But it seems to affect the poor much more than anyone else. And so it seems to be a very unjust system. And And by the way, I'm not pointing any figures at any particular individual or any central bank. I think many of the people in our institutions have good motives and are trying to do the right thing for society. But it's a systemic issue that I think we're trapped in. And one of the things that got me into Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency space is really questioning the fundamentals of the assumptions of our current system. And are those correct? Is an inflation rate correct? Should it be? In South Africa, it's 3 to 6%. In the United States, it's 2%. These are the targeted inflation rates. Why isn't it 0 or 1% or 10% or negative 2%? Or why are we fixated on these numbers? Where have they come from? And the more you ask, the more you realize that not too many people have solid answers for these things. So I think it's really time to relook at money. People work hard for their money. And one of the things that you hope for your money is that it preserves its value over time and space such that you can use it for your children's education, for their future, for any savings or goals that you have. But to kind of overlay on top of money the need for people to become financially savvy, just to know and understand how to combat this pernicious thing in society called inflation, I think really eats away at the freedom of many people in society.
Yeah. There's a book out by author Jeff Booth, and it's called The Price of Tomorrow, where he talks about this very point. You've got these two countervailing forces. On the one hand, technology reduces the costs of things. And on the other hand, you've got inflation, which is raising it. And there's, of course, inflation is winning. Prices are getting higher. But without the existing central bank system, he's arguing that you wouldn't have this inflation. You would have, in fact, deflation. Prices would get lower and would become more affordable for people. Expand on your thoughts a little bit. What would this freedom look like in an era of sound money? I'm not even talking about Bitcoin here, but in an era of sound money where you don't have inflated currencies. What would it mean for central banks and nation states and also financial privacy? Would you be able to transact privately without people knowing what you're doing?
Yeah, so I think first of all, we are in a state where governments really have free rein to create more money. Now, technically, the central banks are not part of the government. I mean, they're meant to be independent institutions that are not pandering to government mandates. In practice, it could be argued that that's not exactly the case, but they are meant to be independent. Now, I think one of the difficulties about our current system as it relates to a system of sound money, we had like the gold standard for a very long time, and there was a lot of actually good that came from the gold standard. But one of the things that has come from getting off the gold standard is the fact that the cost of capital and the amount of capital is just off tilt in society. And so we don't really have a good sense for what the real price of money is. And why is that important? Because the price of money dictates whether a particular project makes sense or not. And should we utilize, the resources that we have as society to proceed with project A, B, or C? Historically, we have used the price of money as a benchmark to be able to determine things like that. But when interest rates go down to zero and you seemingly have an unlimited quantity of money as a society that can just be printed willy-nilly, the adverse effect of that is that it effectively puts into the hands of a few people within civilization and society the ability to kind of manipulate that price of money, which is really changes the temperature for everybody in society that's trying to figure out, whether a project is good to proceed with or not. So there's a real skewing of the measuring stick that we're using. And that the reason that that's very problematic is that let me give you an example. We're very familiar in South Africa with what happened in Zimbabwe and the devaluation and the basically the destruction of their currency now 15 years ago or more. The thing is that if you didn't know that that was happening in real time, you would have been forgiven for looking at the price of your house in terms of Zimbabwean dollars and thinking that you're getting rich. Because in terms of Zimbabwean dollars, the price of your house is going higher and higher. And so you could have felt, wow, I'm getting very rich, I'm getting very wealthy, and I've got a lot of money because the price is going up. But that wasn't a story about the value of your house going up. That was a story of the value of money deteriorating and devaluing in society. And I think we've been seeing a little bit of that with the US dollar over the past, say, 15 years. So in a sound money society, when your metric for value in society is not able to be manipulated, then you have many more restrictions on your ability to use money for things that right now are taking a huge amount of resources of society, such as wars, such as weapons. And there would be a limit on that, because you can't just keep printing the money as a government to go and fund wars that are destructive within society. So that's one of the things that I think if you read the history, you'll see that, in many times in history, where we've been decoupled from sound money is when authorities needed more money to be able to fund, combat. And I think it creates much more discipline in society when you're not able to manipulate the money supply or the price of money for the particular needs of a vested interest. And so I think we need to start looking at how do we get back there, and how do we actually evaluate how we should use our resources in society. But that requires a better measuring stick, a better money. And I think it will take some time for us to move out of this phase. But some of the damage is quite pernicious and kind of deep-seated in society, and it's working its way through society. There will be a lot of suffering, but we will get out of it. I'm certain of that.
Yeah, I think one of the pernicious effects is you see people in South Africa living paycheck to paycheck, and they're in fact,
correct,
they're going into debt to finance their current living standards, and they're paying exorbitant interest rates sometimes on that debt. There's no way out that they can see. Now, Bitcoin was conceived as a route out for this, and a lot of people will say, well, you got to have money to get into Bitcoin. That is true, and maybe you can address that point: is how does it become a vehicle for the ordinary person? But one of the points that was raised in the Bitcoin Standard, the book by Safedin Amos, was that currencies, which are not sound money because they can be easily inflated, create dangerous speculative habits. So you're pushed into taking bets on the stock market, in the bond market, and various other property. You've just mentioned Zimbabwe as an example. Now, do you agree with him that Bitcoin does away with the need for speculation? Because that's one of the core tenets of his book. You don't need to speculate if you've got sound money.
I think I understand what he's saying, which is to say, like, in the gold standard, you could hold your money in gold, and gold kind of it maintained its value over time. So from that perspective, I think that's correct. That you're not trying to find speculative assets which you're not sure whether they'll beat inflation or not. The only thing that you do know is that if you keep your money in cash and fiat currency, you know for sure that you will be losing against inflation. So it pushes you to kind of try to find some type of an asset that you think will beat inflation. So I think it will remove that type of a speculative aspect. I don't think it will remove speculation in society from a monetary perspective. From the perspective of human beings are always trying to create value, and there have been assets that have appreciated much more than gold at that time, right? Or companies that did much better than just holding your money at gold during the gold standard. And I think same thing would happen if you were under a Bitcoin standard. It's not like that speculation would change. I think speculation is oftentimes related to technology booms. We're speculating on a particular new process in society, technology in society, that's not just for monetary gain, but there's actually something exciting about how we're progressing as a civilization. So I don't think it would remove speculation, and I don't think he would necessarily disagree with me here, but I just wanted to clarify. I think he's talking about speculation just to keep your money and hold its value, but not removing speculation from society. I think speculation from the perspective, I'm not talking about betting. I'm talking about thinking about what could progress things. And we're not always right about that in society. We have lots and lots of startups trying new things. I think that would definitely continue.
All right, let's talk about the Bitcoin price itself. Bitcoin recently dropped to about $52,000, which is quite a drop from its peak, which was about $70,000 earlier in the year. Whenever these dips take place, there's an element of gloating from the Bitcoin haters that the end is nigh and it's going to go to zero. That has never happened. It's been predicted many times. But what's going on here? Why the recent drop?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I knew the exact reasons. Ultimately, it comes to supply and demand, as we know. Bitcoin is still a very divisive instrument from the perspective that people have a whole plethora of thoughts on it. Some, like myself, think it's worth much more than its price is right now. So right now it's sitting about $56,000. And some think it has no value at all and it deserves to be a zero. And I think with such a nascent asset that's, 15 years old right now, we have this interplay with the people that think it's going to be higher and the people that think it's going to be lower. But I also think beyond just that speculative view, there are a number of things that are uncertain right now. For example, the United States elections. We don't exactly know which way that will be going. The Trump administration has been very pro-crypto. The Kamala camp has, or actually, I'll just call it the current Biden-Kamala administration has been quite anti-crypto, although I think there's been a lot of work recently to address that. And I think actually some people think it won't make a difference which way the election turns out. But the point is that there's still a lot of uncertainty there. So from that perspective, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's also a lot of uncertainty with regard to our economy right now. Our interest rates are much higher than they've been over the last 15 years. Are those going to start moderating? Are they not? And in many ways, Bitcoin in the short term acts as a risk asset. So it kind of goes in line with your stocks and bonds actually that have been oftentimes behaving the same way. But longer term, as we've seen, there's a decoupling of Bitcoin with some of those other assets like stocks and bonds, and it's done much, much better over the last 10 years, as an example. So I think right now, the price of where we are, there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of people are wondering whether, the ETFs and the adoption from Wall Street is going to take it much higher or not. There was, kind of that situation where after the ETFs were listed, the price actually went down rather than up. It was kind of buy the rumor, sell the news type of a situation. It's obviously gone up much higher since then. I think at the time, I can't remember exactly, but we were in the 40s. So I think, again, if you zoom out, yes, 52 is quite a big drop from 70. But, I remember just a few years ago having conversations with the CEOs of some of the banks in South Africa. The price at the time was $2,000. And they were saying, this is really inflated. There's no way that Bitcoin is worth $2,000. And, you go a few years earlier than that, when it hit parity with the US dollar, and it was $1, people were saying, this is ridiculous. How can the Bitcoin be worth $1? So I still have my sights over the next, 10 years, 5 to 10 years. I think it's going to be in the hundreds of thousands of US dollars, if not more. And again, just because of the scarcity and also because of the fact that Bitcoin really is an internet protocol. It cannot be censored. And there's something very powerful about that, where you can have your own financial sovereignty and hold it, which goes to your initial question about the freedom of money. Right now in our current system, we are basically at the beck and call of, or not the beck and call, that's the wrong expression, but basically at the mercy of a system where if you're caught up in the wrong way, then you can have no access to your money. This happened to me actually about 10 years ago. For some reason, I still don't know, I was cut off my bank account and my credit card, and for about 48 hours, I had no access to being able to spend my money. I had to contact the bank. there was some type of a mistake, and then they reinstituted it. I still don't know why that was the case. That can't be done with Bitcoin because it's completely outside of the current system that we have, where people really, if they have access to the internet and they have their own key, then they're able to spend it. And I think there's a powerful narrative there.
That brings us to the point about Bitcoin's scalability. It can only process about 7 transactions a second. The Lightning Network, which sits on top of the Bitcoin protocol, seems to have solved the problems since millions of transactions can now be done very, very fast on the blockchain. Few people know this, about this problem of scalability, and it does appear to be a serious barrier to broader adoption. How do you see that being solved? This is something I've asked you before. How do we scale this?
I think it's quite difficult. As we know, the Bitcoin blockchain itself is quite limited in the amount of space it has in each block, and as a result is limited in the amount of transactions that can be processed at any given time. That is, that feeds into why sometimes the price of Bitcoin to make a transaction on the blockchain is higher than lower. It's a very market oriented price mechanism there. But there's a lot of work, whether it's Lightning Network or work on other solutions that is being done. I think there's a level of humility that I at least have learned to try to have, which is to say, we don't know for sure what the future holds. I do believe that Bitcoin will go much higher. Am I 100% sure of that? No, I don't think anybody can be 100% sure of that. Do I think that Bitcoin will solve all of the world's problems? No, there's a lot of work we have to do as society that's not just our money. But coming back to the scalability issue, there's a lot of work being done by a lot of smart people across the world to figure this out. I don't believe we're going to be moving to society that is going to be fully on-chain. And what I mean by that is where everybody is, holds their own keys and there's no trusted institutions, and then everybody's kind of getting onto the Bitcoin blockchain to process a transaction. I think people sometimes forget the fact that we have been in a decentralized financial system. When we had the gold standard and people were using, bearer instruments, whether it was shells or coins or animal hides or wampum or whatever it may have been, that was decentralized, right? People had, possession of their own money and they spent it as they wished. But then there was a reason that they moved from a decentralized system like that to a centralized system, because there was more promise for more security. Sometimes it was easier to carry around the monetary instruments. And so we've kind of moved, I think, more recently to a very centralized system that people said, wait a minute, there's too much change here. And now we've started moving towards more of a decentralization once again. But I don't think the pendulum is going to go all the way there. So I think we'll have some type of a system where people can opt out. But I think there will be centralized intermediaries in a future financial system that will also help with off-chain transactions. Valor does that as well. So if you send money between two Valor customers, we don't put that transaction off-chain. It just there's an update to our ledger, and therefore it's not on-chain. So I think there's going to be things like that with centralized intermediaries. I think there will also be much more efficient ways of like layer 2s or maybe other types of transaction mechanisms that won't put everything onto the Bitcoin blockchain itself. So what it ultimately looks like, I'm not 100% sure. I think there are many more technically more experienced people than myself that are working on that. But what I do know for sure is that many people care about this, and many people are working hard to find solutions to these problems. So I'm not too worried about that. And I've talked to a number of them, and many of them are saying that there are many promising solutions in the works. So I think we'll have to wait and see. It will take some time and some testing to see what's effective and what's not.
All right. Give us a bit of insight into some of the developments at Valor over the course of this year, 2024. You recently received your crypto asset service provider license. When I say recently, it's probably a few months old at this point. And you continue introducing new products and services. So what's the latest on that front?
Yeah, so maybe just to go back, we started off Valor with really just offering spot markets, which is just buying Bitcoin and some other crypto assets. So just being able to buy and sell and and then obviously you could deposit and withdraw. We then moved on to spot margin, which is providing people some ability to leverage some of their trades for capital efficiency purposes. And then we've also moved into the future space, perpetual futures, where it's really the ability to take a view on which way the price is going to be going, and again, much more capital efficient, and you can get your P&L paid out to you as basically intraday, which is a wonderful product to have. And then we have a bunch of other products like ValorPay that we've done in the past, and auto buy and auto sell. Our focus right now is really refining the products that we have, making sure that this is really the best product that it can possibly be, and taking it to many more jurisdictions and countries. So we're spending a lot of time in Asia these days, and really expanding our footprint, and really looking at the corridor between Asia and Africa and also Europe. We've got our Polish approval as well in Europe. And so there are a few things in the pipeline that are coming up, but the one of the main things that we're really focusing on is just the ability to get fiat currency on and off the platform smoothly. We now offer not just Rand, but the ability to get US dollars onto the platform. We recently launched euros as well, so you can get euros onto the platform as well. And we're working on broadening that as well. You can use credit cards on the platform now to get your money from South Africa. And so there's many things that we want to do, but we're really focusing on some of the fundamentals to make sure that it's seamless to get your fiat currency on and off, and to let the market decide what Bitcoin and crypto is worth. So an exchange is something that's quite sophisticated. The latency needs to be very low. Our application programming interface, our API, needs to be extremely functional. So we've been spending a lot of time focused on refining those. And then we've got a few things that we'll be announcing relatively soon, as usual. But those we always like to wait till they're actually in production until we announce them.
All right. And I saw recently you opened an office in Singapore.
Singapore is actually, we have our international holdco is in Singapore. So we don't operate in Singapore, but we have a Singaporean entity that holds all of our international operations.
All right. Final thoughts. Thanks for that. On the update on Valor, your final thoughts on Bitcoin as an instrument of freedom. Are we talking about something in the distant future, something that's vague, or something more tangible and more realizable in the shorter term?
So I'm gonna leave you with a beautiful quote. Actually, this is a quote that was written from a document called "Who's Writing the Future?" that was published by the Baha'i International Community in the year 1999. Okay, so this is a whole decade before Bitcoin was even on the scene. And one of the lines from that document says the following. It said, "It would be difficult to exaggerate the psychological and social impact of the anticipated replacement of the jumble of existing monetary systems, for many the ultimate fortress of nationalist pride, by a single world currency operating largely through electronic impulses."
That's quite prescient that this came out in 1999. Anticipated 10 years later came Bitcoin.
It really is. And the reason I want to end with that is that we really do just have, as a society, a jumble of random currencies around the world, a society that if you're an alien coming onto our planet, and then you walked from one place to another, you took a big step, alien step, let's say, and then you're using some coins here and some coins there. It's a real nuisance, our current system, and this is obviously coming off of my belief of humanity being a single human race, where we have way too many divisions amongst us. And that really we should be united. And so I think, in my mind, there is no doubt that we are moving towards a financial system that will have a universal system of currency. I think probably Bitcoin and some other, like whether it's Bitcoin or not, I think it will probably be some type of instrument that's underpinned by cryptography. I think it's such a powerful thing to have. But I think we're moving in that direction, whether it's Bitcoin or something else. And so I don't know how quick or not that will be. I think that we're moving steadily towards it. But there will have to be quite a lot of shifts in society for that to happen. And I don't know what that will look like. I spend a lot of time thinking about that. I am certain in my own view of the future that we have to move away from what we currently have. But it eludes me sometimes about how exactly we're going to get there.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Farzam, for particularly that quote at the end. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. And thanks again for your insights into what Bitcoin, what kind of freedom does it envisage for the future of humanity. I think it was a good discussion.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, hosted by Kieran Ryan. To listen to our other podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates.